Hi, welcome to the Euphonium Summit with Farm for Dreams. I'm Nicholas Hofter von Heide, host, and we have here Dr. Dan Sipes down here, and do that again. Hi, welcome to Euphonium Summit. I'm Nicholas Hofter von Heide, host and founder of Farm for Dreams. I have here today with Dan Sipes. Dr. Dan Sipes is an accomplished musician in many areas. As a soloist, he has performed in numerous states, including New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, Texas, California, and Illinois. He has performed with chamber ensembles at the Spoleto Festival, the Lucerne Music Festival, and on NPR. As an orchestral musician, he is the principal tubist with the Corpus Christi Symphony and has played with the San Antonio, Phoenix, North Carolina, Charleston, Charlotte Symphonies, among others. Dr. Dan Sipes teaches low brass music business and music technology at the Texas A&M University at Corpus Christi. He has previously taught at the UT San Antonio campus, Trinity University, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Texas A&M at Kingsville, Western Carolina University, Appalachian State University, and the Lenoir-Rhyne College. He has presented over 200 clinics at conferences in Florida, New York, Pennsylvania, Georgia, North Carolina, California, Washington, Oregon, and Texas. He received his Doctorate of Educational Leadership from Texas A&M Corpus Christi, Master of Music Performance degree from Appalachian State University, and a Bachelor of Music Program Performance degree at Arizona State University. Primary teachers were Arnold Jacobs, Roger Bobo, and John Sizemore. He also taught me for a little bit. So personal biased, and is a really amazing individual, great heart for not only his teammates, his colleagues, and his students, just an overall awesome mentor. Welcome aboard.
Thanks so much. Appreciate the introduction.
Yeah. So what age did you start playing? I know you started playing on tuba, but you're just such a phenom on low brass instruments. When did you pick up euphonium?
Well, I picked up both, primarily tuba and euphonium to a certain degree my freshman year of high school. I had actually started back in the 6th grade on trombone. Very long story short, my freshman year in high school, I broke my trombone at marching band rehearsal, and the band director said, I need a tuba player, low brass player. And so he handed that to me. I was the shortest kid in the band. I got to a practice room. I played a couple notes. The windows shook, the light fixture rattled. And I thought, this is very cool. And that was kind of the love at first sound.
That's pretty epic. Oh man. So what brought you into the euphonium world, transcending from the tuba?
Well, since it's in the same octave and everything, that kind of makes it it was just a lateral move at that point, just going from valves to slides. But, I really had to sort of relearn how to do articulations, going from trombone to euphonium and tuba.
Right. That's really awesome. When did you first start taking lessons? Was it on trombone or was it on tuba?
It was on tuba. I did that my senior year in high school. That's when I met my mentor, John Sizemore. He had just moved back from Chicago to North Carolina. He was teaching at the School of the Arts, and I started driving there every weekend to go have lessons with him, and that was fantastic.
That's awesome. Where did Arnold Jacobs come into the awesome picture here?
Well, basically, Sizemore, John Sizemore, had got a job at Western Carolina University, and that's where I went for my freshman year in high school. That fall, the trombone professor there had played this recording of him playing, and I thought, that's where I've got to be. So I had a long talk with my teacher, John Sizemore, and I moved to Chicago. I just dropped everything, moved up there after Christmas, and was there for several years studying with him and going to school.
That's awesome. Now we've recorded several artists who mention Arnold Jacobs and his teachings and such like that, amongst other greats like Leonard Falcone and Art Lehman and a lot of really amazing players Roger Bobo is a not new to the industry, obviously, but for euphonium players, most beginners won't necessarily understand the impact. And that's where I think and value your input for the crossover into a greater, broader low brass aspect with Roger Bobo.
Hello.
Well, how I ended up studying with Roger Bobo is I had studied in Chicago for several years with Arnold Jacobs. And at that point, he had to take some time off. He had fallen ill. And really, the only reason I was in Chicago at that time was to study with him. And so that wasn't going to happen. So I started looking for other avenues. And I really wanted to go study with Roger Bobo. At that time, the only place he was at was Cal Arts. And that was a very atypical program at that time. It was, it was a very much just this kind of artsy place that really didn't have an accredited degree. So that was not an option. So the closest place I could go was Arizona State because they had offered me a really great scholarship and everything. And it was a huge program. So I went there. And then what I was doing the entire time I was there is about once a month, I would drive to California and take lessons with Roger Bobo, which was just fantastic while he was playing at the LA Philharmonic and come back. The way I afforded that, I am not rich by any stretch, is I would deliver cars for just various car companies to the docks and make enough money to pay for the lesson and fly back.
Now that's ingenuity at its best. For those that are watching, if you're in college and you are trying to come up with some creative ways to get to certain private lessons or certain gigs. I mean, there's Craigslist, there's Uber and stuff like that, but right there, delivering cars across the country or to destinations. I mean, wow, that's pretty ingenious. Wow. I never heard that one while I was going to school there.
Well, a lot of car companies would test their cars out in the desert. And so that's why they were there. And then they would sell them to different individuals and I would go deliver them.
That's really remarkable. Yeah, ASU has one of the, or rather the Phoenix area is well known with the different climates and the extremes, I should put. So when did you first realize that you wanted to do this and pursue this as a dream career?
Well, it actually really happened back in high school. My dad had been an engineer way back. He was a mechanical engineer. My oldest brother was an electrical engineer, and I had a lot of math aptitude. That's kind of what everybody thought I was going to do. So I remember though very distinctly at the end of my junior year, I was thinking, well, what do I want to do? Where do I want to go to school? And I envisioned if I did that, I would not be able to play, tuba and euphonium anymore. And I really could not fathom that concept. So I said, well, I guess I'll be a music major.
Well, that's an interesting twist right there. That's really cool. That's really awesome. When did scales and arpeggios, long tones become the foundation of warm-ups for you?
Well, I was very fortunate all the way back from the 6th grade on in North Carolina at the time. The tradition was to really use the Arbin book. There's a method, it's called the Arbin-Prescott method, where you actually pass stuff off every week. And it would be long tones, scales, just lots of little technical studies. And we would get check marks and you would add that up to weeks. And then after you had passed off a year of these studies, you would get a medal. And so we had medals on our uniforms. And so the real game in high school was to see how many medals you could get before you graduated. As soon as I went to John Sizemore, who had studied with Arnold Jacobs, that's when I learned all about breathing and the importance of long tones. And so that really became my primary focus because, since air really is the foundation of what we do, and how you shape the oral cavity, that really determines your tone color. And so that takes great significance. And to this day, every single day I start off with long tones. And when students come in for lessons, the very first thing we do is we play a few long tones together.
Yep. I can totally I can totally agree with that statement there. So when did you establish a routine with practicing? Was it through the Arbin Prescott method? Was that what really solidified your routine?
Well, that was just kind of the beginning, and I realized that that was not the entire scene. When I went to Jacobs, he really talked about singing through the instrument, and he actually gave me some vocal exercises to play on the tuba and euphonium. It was called the Bona exercises, Bona etudes, Bona, and they were very lyrical. And then I discovered the Bordoni Rochu studies, and that became that wing of my playing also. So when I practice, and something I have all my students do too, is I always say you want to put it in 4 parts. They should be, if you're going to practice an hour, you do about anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes on your long tones, those sorts of exercises. Then you spend another 15 minutes on your technical studies. That would be scales and Arbin and that sort of thing. Then I say the next 15 minutes should be your lyrical studies. That would be the Bordoni Rochu studies or things of that nature. And then the last 15 minutes would actually be the literature that you're going to play, because if you put all those other pieces into place, then you're much more effective and efficient when you get to that part of the playing. And I say if you're going to practice for 2 hours, I almost, instead of extending all those other parts, I really kind of start over to keep all those basics always going.
Huh. Okay. Do you recommend, so if someone did set aside 2 hours, just to dive a little deeper, if one of the current and or new student artists that are setting up their practice routine, would you recommend splitting that 2 hours into 2 1 hour segments at separate times? Or
if you have that luxury, now the thing I will say is if you're getting ready for an audition, or you have some solo literature, or you're getting ready for all state competitions, then that second hour I would just do a quick review of your basic studies, the long tones for 5 or 10 minutes, and then you can get back into your literature. If you're maintaining, then I say keep restarting over each hour. If you actually have a very specific goal that you're trying to get to, then that can be altered. I really learned that being here in Texas, because All-State really is, the competition is such a big deal that I really had to restructure my teaching for high school students, because that was really such a huge goal that I had to start focusing a lot more on that part of the lesson.
yeah, absolutely. Texas sure does know how to compete.
Yes.
On many different levels. When did you start? Have you implemented any yoga or stretching with the vocal exercises that Arnold Jacobs bestowed upon you?
Well, that's actually how I've ended up doing all my, this myriad of clinics that I did. Is it's all about the breathing techniques that I got from Arnold Jacobs very specifically. And when I did my master's degree, at this point, I had already studied with Arnold Jacobs and Roger Bobo, and I'd had a few lessons with Warren Deck, and studied just a little bit with Don Harry. And I was trying to piece together what did they all do that was similar, and it had a lot to do with that basic breathing process and keeping everything relaxed. So I really worked that down, distilled it down to about 6 steps that I could teach on a quick basis to kind of get things started. And so, yes, the first thing that happens when a student comes into my studio, we spend usually anywhere from 40 minutes to an hour just going through this whole process on how to breathe and stay relaxed as you play and make sure everything is open as possible. So yes, that's a very significant part. And, the whole process has been called Dan's Yoga and Dan's Aerobics, because I have them stand a lot when they do this too.
That's really awesome. And do you offer that anywhere for others to view by chance?
I actually have not put that down on video, mainly because it's kind of important that I'm there to observe what's working and what's not working. So that was the thing that Jacobs was just the master of. He could diagnose a problem so quickly. And I will not say I'm anywhere near that kind of technique, but that's what I try to do also. So if I just blindly put those out there, you could do the 6 steps and think you're right, and it's not, or it's not really working for you. It needs to be observed.
Sounds
That's why
like
we do all the clinics.
sounds like we need to have a Farm for Dreams clinic down in with Dr. Dan Sipes. If anybody would be interested, put a absolutely right below. That would be amazing. Let's see where we can go with that here in the future. That's really awesome. Did you with breathing, does that include resistance training at all, or not included?
That really is not included in what I do. I mean, I see, what I've really tried to do is very specifically for low brass. It's much different as soon as you get up a couple octaves, in particular, trumpet or horn or anything like that. And even euphonium, when you get into that upper register, there's just a different approach in everything.
That's really awesome. Yeah, I totally agree. What I know you sport Milo Weston. In especially private lessons wise, what was your first go-to equipment when you first picked up tuba?
Well, I've had some really strange instruments over the years. My first one in high school, I actually bought it from my teacher, John Sizemore. It was a Trevani, and it was a model called the Piggy. And I liked it because the bore size on it was 0.805. So it was immense. So I really had to I feel like that's what helped me learn to really get air flowing, because you couldn't hold back or you got no sound out of the darn thing. So
that's a Cervini, right?
Yes.
Okay. Was that the little Piggy? Was that the one you took to Arnold Jacobs lessons?
Yes, actually, it had been his horn that John Sizemore had bought from him.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. I did not know that.
Yeah. I felt so fortunate. I would still have that to this day, but at one point, Sizemore asked me to sell it back to him, and how could I say no? So
yeah. So what else did he have?
I had a very unusual horn. Before that, it was a little F tube. It was called the Mihelian, and it was a little Italian instrument. It actually becomes the basis of it kind of becomes the basis for the Milo Weston Hojo model, which is the smaller size, 4/4 size C, B flat, and F tuba.
Well, that's awesome. I did not know that was wow, we should talk on that. So much history there. What other equipment did you have?
Well, I did go through for years. I only played C tuba. I felt like, well, I can just learn everything and be able to play high and all that kind of stuff. And I had a discussion one time with a quintet I was playing. We were riding to a gig, and the trumpet players were talking about all their equipment. And I kind of just said, so, why do you use all this different equipment? Why don't you just learn to do everything on just a couple of horns? And they said, well, we're always looking for something that makes the job easier. And to me, dense me, that was a real light bulb moment. I thought, well, that makes perfect sense. So literally within about 3 weeks, I went and bought an F tuba. And way back then, what I had access to was the Yamaha, it's a little 621 model. And that turned out that was the basis of the F tuba that Reynolds Schilke had built for Jacobs. And this very long, convoluted story, how that went from Schilke's shop to Yamaha and everything. And so that was a very good fit. And I played that a number of years. I was at a convention. I got to play a few Milo Westons, and that really was just for me the perfect match.
What was your do you currently own any euphoniums?
Mainly the euphonium that I use is the Yamaha the 642 model, I think they call it. So yeah, the Neo, yeah, that's great. I really like that instrument.
It's also really light comparatively with the other ones.
It's a big change from everything else. It really takes a different approach. That's for darn sure.
It is. so to dive deeper a little bit on that with your current and past students who have had their own horns, where do you see most student artists gravitate toward on a instrument if their parents were to purchase one, or if the student artist were to purchase their own? What would be a kind of a rule of thumb to go by when looking at euphoniums and tubas?
Well, on euphonium, especially if they're in high school or something, and depending on their budget and everything, I feel like a lot of the Yamahas are very consistent. With some of the other instruments, I mean, consistency, none of them are usually bad. They just all play differently. Besson is another one that's very consistent. It again has all these different brands have a particular unique sound to them. So if the Besson fits what you're doing, that's another solid instrument that's fairly consistent. There was Wilson for a long time. It used to be the Hirschbrenner, which is now the Adams. That's kind of some of the upper level ones, I do feel like. So that's a good line to go to also.
Right. Awesome. When you first started playing, did you what kind of equipment did you first start out with, like metronomes, tuners? I know a pencil was definitely required for that, but did you have a personal did you have your own metronome and tuner when you first started?
Well, at that time, I'm going to date myself here. You didn't really have portable tuners. We had a big old Strobicon in the band hall, and we would use that all the time. I loved that because what I really liked about the Strobicon is, since it had all the different dials on it, you would play your note and it would lock on if you're on pitch. But then you could see the overtone series, like if you're playing a C, you might see the G will also line up, and then the C above that will line up, and then maybe the E. So it's like, wow. So that's how you really know when your tone is really focused and open.
I will say, to be honest, I never noticed the overtone series on on my band's strobe. As many times as I went up there, which was a few times in my day, I never noticed the overtone series, mostly because all the clarinets and everyone in the front row, because that's where the strobe was usually located. That's pretty awesome. What do you use for apps, or what do you see your students using for apps nowadays for lessons, for at-home practices and stuff like that?
Well, we still use, some smart music for some of the accompaniments for all kinds of different exercises. We live and die these days by fourscore, because that's just got both your metronome and your tuner and everything built into it. Especially for tuba and euphonium, because of our lower register, I feel like if you can, it's good to have a separate microphone, or a little better microphone, to get those lowest frequencies if you really want to get all those fundamentals. There are a couple of pieces of software. One I use, I love, I'll actually have to look up the name for you on it, is it does show your overtone spectrum as you play. And that's one of the things I do with the students, is we want to see as many of those even overtones line up as possible. So that's, again, that is a device. You can make some of that stuff line up, and it still may not be the sound you want, but at least it's a guide. So much of what we do is guides. We can't say there's anything definitive.
Right, because everybody's journey is different.
Right. And you did ask about the basics, metronome, metronome, metronome. Yes, that's one of the things I had to really live by in high school, and really do have ever since, because I feel like so many times low brass players, since our bells are facing up, by nature, our sound gets to the conductor and to the front of the group later, because it's got to go up a number of feet, bounce off the ceiling, come back down, go at that angle to your conductor. And even if you're dead on the beat, you're a lot of times perceived as late.
Right. Precisely. It's really interesting. A lot of the beginner and formatively new student artists that are rising through the ranks through middle school, junior high, and high school, some of them haven't equated, or even the parents haven't equated the physics of the sound as it rises through and goes through the various different phases and manipulations of what's around. So it's really interesting. That really plays into really diving deeper into the solo repertoire and how it really solos and just producing that sound to go across the auditorium.
We really have to worry about projection. I always recommend my students, to take an acoustics class, because we really need to see how that sound traverses. First thing I always try to do in a concert hall is, where can I have my sound reflect off of to get the most direct right to that conductor so they know what's going on? And am I projecting into the hall? Because particularly if you're on a stage where it's got the proscenium and everything, if you're just playing up into rafters, you can be blowing your head off, sound fine on stage, and they will not hear it in the hall. So, that's something we really have to focus on. So if you have any reflective surface, you got to look for that. One other consideration we have to worry about how our sound gets out there is, again, if that metronome, I'm always just a fraction in front of the beat, because the other thing we have to deal with is psychoacoustics, how we perceive sound. Lower frequencies literally take the brain longer to process. And so, we're just talking fractions of a millisecond, but still it is fractions of a millisecond. So, I tend to just be a little ahead to make it sound right.
Are there any acoustics classes currently offered at your university for like the beginner artists or high school artists to like kind of an introduction to acoustics, or could there be potentially in the future?
Well, we have an engineering program which has the acoustics classes. And that's what I had to do when I was in high school too. It's not too, or when I was in college, it's not too often that you're going to find a dedicated audio acoustics class in a music program. There's a few.
That's really awesome. So many questions to follow up with you on that one.
Sure.
At a later time. So that's really, really awesome. Now we've talked about your teachers. Have they imparted any specific principles that we haven't covered already, or things that were so crucial and critical to who you are today?
Well, it really is that vocal approach. When I would listen to, again, way back, the examples I could listen to were William Bell and Arnold Jacobs, and both of them sang really well too. They very much had that singing approach to their tuba playing, also, and to their low brass playing in general. But that vocal technique, having all those oral cavities open and everything, and just should really come through our instrument. So I always say we're just like a vocalist, except our instrument is our lips instead of our vocal cords. Other than that, the approach is very, very similar.
That's cool. So going back to your high school years and formative college years, when did you start competing? Was it just our region and solo ensemble, or did you enter any global or just regional competitions?
When I was younger, there wasn't access to quite as much of that. I just did the solo ensemble and all and everything when I was in high school. When I got to college, that's when TUBA had just started. That's what it was called at that time. And they had some competitions, so I did enter those. But the thing is even though in one of them I placed and I got a partial scholarship to go, I just couldn't afford to go. I was a poor broke college student. I also entered another solo competition that was up in Pennsylvania while I was in Arizona at that time. Again, I just did not have the money to go to the semifinal round that I had been picked for. So that's kind of where I was.
And just letting you know, for the student artists, there was no GoFundMe at that time.
Absolutely. Yeah, there was no internet or anything. So right.
I didn't want to go that far, but yes,
that's okay.
It was not that. Did cover that in other interviews That seems to be the prevalent factor here, which is really awesome how this what we have the ability to do nowadays and to transcend the learning curve that we as artists and those who have traversed the pre-internet phase to now, and to bring all that knowledge and all that experience to the beginning artists and those that are just starting out, and to really shorten that curve with really fine-tuned advice and techniques, and just so rich. It's like you said the term earlier, distill. It really distills down to a really fine sauce.
And one of the things I would say for anybody is to really embrace, technology and change, because I have a cat up here a second, so that's okay. So really embrace technology and change, because it's going to happen. For me, I had a big interest in electronics even in high school, and I still distinctly remember walking to a music store one time, and they had a little short keyboard. It's one of the first ones I'd ever seen. And it had two settings on it, and it said euphonium, tuba, bass guitar. And I thought, I can be replaced. I better know about this stuff. And so I've always really been interested in all the change. So, what we have now, being able to watch almost every etude and solo that you want to play on YouTube is just fantastic.
How many of your students, talking about technology, how many of your students have their own YouTube channel? Well, more specifically, your business students per se. How many of your students have started their own YouTube channel or created their own identity online for as far as music goes, for after college?
Well, I would say, it's probably about half, and that's because some people want to be the performer and some people want to be in a different position. Okay. So I really get that mix in the music industry program. So, I have some people that have ended up in New York and they're doing great, and other places. And then I have plenty that are behind the scenes.
That's awesome.
And, YouTube is cool, but a lot of people also are on TikTok. And, I'm really kind of anxious to see where Threads ends up. And of course, Snapchat and everything else. So there's lots of options. And with the classes I teach on this, I literally have to throw out at least a third of it every year, because things keep changing so fast.
Well, there's some really awesome things that are coming up. So I'm interested in seeing what your take is on it, and perhaps it'll be so prevalent to where it's not as prevalent as Threads is currently in our spheres of influence, but it should be ramping up pretty soon here with some other tech spaces. What are three things that you'd wish that that you have knowledge and working ability in that you wish you had when you first started? That's a loaded question, I understand, but what are these? What would be three things that you really want to enrich your beginning artists with?
Understanding the business aspect of music. Okay. I mean, that really is just such a tremendous part of it, because there are plenty of players we see who are really good and just they can't get anywhere. And, it's really, you have to present yourself. You have to understand how everything works. I distinctly remember one time walking down the street in Chicago on my way to a lesson, and I was just hearing this amazing saxophone player, just incredible jazz. I thought, wow. I was trying to see where he was, because he was obviously out on the street or something. But when I got up to the end of the corner, it was the taxi driver, and he was amazing. And I thought, wow, I don't want to be that guy. Okay. Because here he was, this great saxophone player who's driving a cab. Nothing wrong with driving a cab, but I'm sure he would rather be playing a saxophone. So it really is understanding those business aspects so that you can be the person that's successful. There's plenty of popular artists that we can listen to and you go, they're not very good, but here they are,
Mhm.
incredibly successful. What do they know that I don't know? And so that's really what we gotta to understand and figure out how it works.
What's really unique about the music business aspect in one hand, Corpus Christi in the other, and recording is when I studied under you for a little bit, it was said that Corpus Christi was the #3 recording city in the United States, especially regards to Tejano music.
Absolutely. And actually, it's number 5, but you're pretty close. It's okay. But yeah, so it really is kind of a who's who. There's some amazing studios here, a lot of great things, that go on in this area. So yeah, it's very unique. That's why I felt it was especially important to start that program here.
Yeah, well, I mean, with tuba euphonium, the bombardinos and the just what we bring, what that community there brings to the global aspect. I think, oh, I don't want to spill the beans on any of that just yet.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited. One of my former students, he really got into that scene, and he plays regularly now with the Cumbia Kings. He
Oh,
sends
that's
me
amazing.
pictures of them playing in Monterey for 100,000 people. It's like, I've
Wow.
never played for 100,000 people.
No, your legacy is playing through 100,000 people. You taught that person. That's really awesome. That's really valuable. And that's the testament of doing this right here, the summit for euphoniums, is being able to showcase the professors, the professional artists, the journeys of everyone from where they're at to where they've been, and to help showcase amazing journeys to have y'all be out there to see or to be heard for these up and coming artists that are even partly considering music as an endeavor or a means to an end, a viable future, right? Because they've been working on their talent for 6+ years. Why not just dive into that and make it all you can? And that's an amazing testament. That might have been shortly after I left.
Actually, that one was just very recent. He went to school some time back, but it's really just I've really enjoyed following his progress over the years.
That's really amazing. That's really amazing. I'll put a link down to the Colombian Kings down below when this goes live. That's really awesome. So we talked about breathing and off horn specifically when it comes to practicing and dramatically increasing your abilities in producing that sound. What other element, well, singing as well, what other elements have you taken off horn specifically that have really developed that?
Well, one of the things that's so important is to just really remain relaxed. Whenever we breathe, we tend to focus on, what's moving. Is the chest going up? Is the stomach going out? And all that sort of thing. I always say, don't focus on that part of it. When you take a breath, you just want to fill up with the air. Your body will do what's necessary. What works for one person will not work for another. That's why I say it's so important to do this stuff in person, because our physiology really plays into that a lot. So don't try to make your physiology mirror somebody else's. Yours will take care of it. If you just focus on the air and staying relaxed, the body will take care of itself.
That really leads right into the next question about articulation. How would you define your processes when it comes to practicing articulation?
Well, to me, the articulation we have to use on low brass, euphonium, tuba, in general, needs to be much stronger than it would be if you tried the same technique on upper brass. It would just be like a sforzo to attack. But I always say I use the T And that's when the tongue hits the back of the front teeth. It's called the uvular ridge, and it comes straight down. That you get that little pop of sound of air. We need that because our instruments are so long, and on top of that, they're conical. Okay, whereas a trumpet and a trombone are cylindrical. When you put that pop, it stays consistent all the way through the tubes until it gets to the last third, where the tubing finally gets bigger. Our instruments, only the first third of it is cylindrical, and then 2/3 is conical. It's getting bigger. So we have to put enough pop to make sure that it's heard in the hall, because again, our bells face up. And so there's a lot of things working against it to have a good attack. We don't want to sound like woof woof out in the hall. We want it to have that pop. Unless you're playing lyrical music, then it's a whole different process. But to get those attacks, it needs to be fairly strong. And so that's something I spend a lot of time on, also developing the different kinds of attacks we need on that. That's what I was saying, even from way back when I went from trombone to euphonium and tuba, I really had to change my approach on the attacks.
That's fascinating. With the discussion that we've had in this conversation and interview, we've spoken about acoustics, articulation, and concert production, and the voicing of what happens when one plays during the actual concert and how it projects out. How does phrasing all work with the confines of all we've spoken about?
Well, the real trick so much with phrasing is, let's face it flat out. We have
and more for the advanced students, because the beginner artists aren't necessarily going to understand, but need to understand that this is really going on. So.
Right. So the thing we have to really focus on when we're phrasing is, where is the pulse in the music? Okay, what I mean by that is, if we are in 4, the real emphasis is on 1 and 3. Okay, so we want to be sure to never delay 1 or 3. If you take your breath before 1 or before 3, you will sound late. Okay, so I tend to look for those places where I can breathe after a strong beat and then come back in, because that way we do not disrupt those accents. So I pretty much do that with all the phrasing. That's something very elaborate. Again, I do in lessons with all the Rochu and Bordoni studies to figure out where are those placements so it's not disrupted. Basically, we take the full breath. We always take the full breath, but you want to make it something that's not as noticeable. It's almost like a sleight of hand in that sense. Mm-hmm. So, and always when you breathe, make sure you take a nice, deep, full breath. Okay. Don't ever feel like you can take a full breath as fast as you can take a sneak break or whatever. I'm sure you remember back when I would give the example, I always say, you imagine you're breathing in and this is a match and you go like that, trying to put it out by breathing in, so that you really truly fill up the lungs, so you can get anywhere from 3 to 5 liters of air in just that instant. That's just as fast as trying to take a quick or short or shallow breath.
Right. So, and when it's interesting how you bring this up, and you're speaking in terms of when a student artist or an artist in general takes that breath, it's to be relaxed when taking it, because when you think that you have to quickly, when people think of quick, they think of, they tense up, and that tenses everything else up in the upper body. And so that's going to produce such a shallow tone.
Mm-hmm. One of the things to do, especially in technical passages, I mean, a lot of times we'll have 2 or 3 lines of 16th notes where there's nowhere to breathe. So what do you do? So even in groups of 4 16th notes, at times I'll say, okay, I need a breath after this 3rd 16th note. So I will practice it slowly, okay? And go through that. I write all my breaths in to begin with, and I take them from that slow tempo, and as I speed it up, I still take those same breaths. And so we start developing, one of the words Jacobs would use a lot is muscle memory. You anticipate where that breath's going to be. So a really important thing to do too is I like to write the breath marks on my music. That way it's one less thing you have to worry about. It's just like this note is an A, fingering a second valve, I got that breath right after it. So I know to do both of those things because it's on the page.
That's precisely with as our society goes toward a more techier interface, that sequencing lines up with schedules, with how things line up with syllabuses, with your exactly how your life is. I mean, it goes from waking up to what's next, brushing your teeth, what's next is sequencing. Very critical.
Right.
It's really awesome. So going back to your family side, what happened when you told them that you wanted to pick up the trombone first? And then I really want to know what happened when you broke your trombone at practice. What was that conversation?
Well, I started off on trombone because that's what my family owned. So
Gotcha.
that was kind of where I was.
You broke that horn.
Yeah, yeah.
What was that conversation like?
Well, fortunately, it wasn't my fault. I was in marching band rehearsal. I was out in sixth position. I did my turn. The person beside me turned the wrong way and just snapped it right off. And of course, it could be fixed. It wasn't even an expensive fix, but I grew up in the hills of North Carolina, and the band was like, "Yeah, we can send it off. We'll get it back in about 6 weeks." I'm like, "What do I do in the meantime?" He said, "Here's this sousaphone."
And that was your freshman year in high school.
Yes.
So you started green in a sense for marching band, unless you started in 7th and 8th grade for marching band. But in a sense, green, because a lot of freshmen start off that, or the first year of high school, rather, and not to offend anybody. But that first year in high school, you started off with trombone, you broke the trombone, and then out of the necessity, tuba.
Yep. Well, I was fortunate because my oldest brother at that point was playing horn. So I told the band director I wanted to play horn. And he said, "No, I need a tuba player." And long story short, I'm glad that happened because when I was younger as a child, I had childhood asthma. And so I would have been a terrible fit for horn. I probably would have not had any luck.
So that's counterintuitive for a lot of beginner artist parents, or even those parents who don't think that, having childhood asthma, they shouldn't be a musician because of that, period. So as far as childhood asthma in tuba, a lot of people don't think that should be anywhere close to acceptable. How did that transcend over those years?
Well, it really is a matter of how much lung capacity, how you use your air. Because again, when I was in high school, here I had childhood asthma, and I heard about Arnold Jacobs, who had only one functional lung. I figured he knows something I don't know. So that's really why I wanted to study with him, to figure out how to do this. And one of the things I'll attest to also is after about my second lesson with him, I never had another asthma attack. I learned how to breathe.
That's exceptional. That's right there. Should be that's really awesome. If there's anyone that's watching this and you've battled with childhood asthma, or have one of your student artists that are coming up that has battled with it, write the word battled. I'm curious to know how many in our audience is that have dealt with this, or if you're a professional artist, how many of you dealt with this as well? I'm curious to know, because it's not, I wouldn't say uncommon nowadays. It's becoming more prevalent with the newer kid, with the younger generation coming up with the video games and stuff like that, and not really being able to go outside, and especially with the last few years, it's been really interesting. When you told them that you wanted to pursue this as a career, and you wanted to go to Carolina,
Western Carolina.
Western Carolina, for a school, and then ship off to Chicago, like at the end of that semester. What were did they ever show their hands on how they felt about that?
Oh, they just thought I was nuts, I'm sure. But I was always a really independent kid. I was the number 3 out of 5. So normally I always had to kind of fend for myself. And fortunately, when I went to Western Carolina University, I got a good scholarship, so that covered most of that. And in Chicago, I had always worked. I worked on this full-time jobs all the time, and I had my own money, so I just paid for my own move up there and everything. And I worked full time once I got there until I could afford to go to school.
That's wow, that's really awesome. So what are 3? Okay, so this is in response to, or this question's for those that are wanting to pursue the business side of music and become these. We see a proliferation of performing artists with certain instruments, certain brands, and stuff like that. I'm sure it was a lot different when you were starting out and when you were approached by Meinl Weston to be a performing artist for them, or I'm assuming as such. What's that process like of becoming a performing artist for a massive brand like that?
Well, it really depends. Pretty much how it is now is many times, I always say if you can do it in person at all, I mean, that's always great. Music conventions, that's a good time to meet people. But the other way is certain companies have a whole application process to become an artist on those instruments. So they usually say, submit your resume, your background, some recordings, some recommendations. It's almost like a job application in many ways. So I've been with Meinl Weston many, many, many years. I really love that. Before that, when I was playing Yamaha, I actually was an artist for Yamaha also, and there was a procedure I had to go through. I mean, they approached me first, but I still had to go through the whole procedure to get signed up.
That's really awesome. As far as sight reading goes, how important is sight reading personally to you and what you do on a daily level? And how do you implement that in the practice routines and extending that to those in your studio?
Sight reading is basically how you work. That's all it boils down to. I made my living as a gigging musician for about 8 or 9 years. All I did was play. I think I was averaging about 170, services a year. I was just playing different orchestras, different groups. So many times I would put on a tuxedo and sit down with a group. I didn't know anybody and I'd never seen the music before then. So sight reading is that's how you make money. It really is. How I'd approach that over the years is after you've played your stuff, what I would continually do is go back to some of my easier books and just say, okay, I'm going to start on page 1 of this book, and let me just see if I can play it well enough to record. Now, see, for me, from junior high on, I was always involved in recording, partially because I had a cousin who was a really famous DJ, and I used to help him make commercials. And everything had to be perfect. So I started taking that same approach to music too. It's like, I want to play an etude where it's on one take. And I would just go through a book like that. And you just keep expanding on that. When we talk about doing scales and everything, that really sets up your patterns to learn how to look at a piece of music. What is that key? And you're mentally just kind of set your fingers to play in that key. The way I like to approach keys, scales, is the same way they have in the Arbin book. So you're not just playing one scale up and down. I always say I can find a high school student who can play a B natural scale, but playing in the key of B natural is a whole nother story. Mm-hmm. So that's where you really learn that skill, is to play all this etude, those scale studies, starting on every scale degree. So that really works that in there. And I would just say with the sight reading, start simple, get a hymnal, get a songbook, get whatever, and see if you can play parts of it perfectly the first time. And just play it slowly, get it right, and you just constantly whittle away at that, and over the years, that will just get better and better and better. Now, obviously, the more time you spend on something, the better.
Right. How has talking about sight reading and articulation and such like that, have you ever implemented styles that would like improv? Have you ever improved on tuba and euphonium?
I used to love to do that in high school. So I played it for a jazz band. And so the one thing I really looked forward to is when I got to Chicago, it's like, man, that's such a big jazz town. I'm going to get to play jazz. No, they didn't care for tuba and euphonium. So unfortunately, that kind of went by the wayside. So I have not spent as much time on improvisation as I was like, mainly because I just haven't had the opportunity to do it. So I spent that time on learning how to sight read versus the improvisation. Improvisation is a great skill to have because, like one of my students who I said is with Kumbaya Kings and all that kind of stuff. He's an amazing sight reader, and that's how he makes his living. Not sight reading; it's improvising.
Improv.
They just play charts, and he's just got to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So
you just got to let it fly.
Exactly.
That's really awesome. How important is solfege and numerical music notation to what you do nowadays, as opposed to perhaps going up and growing up through the school systems?
Well, I take a little different approach to it as far as knowing where pitches are. I've always said I had good relative pitch. So once I have a pitch, I'm okay on that. But I made a real thing of I like to do mouthpiece practice. I like my students to do mouthpiece practice. So what we will do instead is literally you can buzz a scale or you sing a scale and you do your fingerings, instead. That's really, I felt like how I got through sight singing and ear training in college is as I would sight sing, I would do my fingerings. And that really helped me lock all that in. So that's a strange approach to take, but that really worked for me. So much of that is I would say, for the individual students is find that system that works for you and make it translate into everything else. So I would literally sing solfege as I was doing my fingerings for that particular key.
That's interesting. Maybe an adaptation to our student artists, and a new take would probably be utilizing the numerical notations, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 per scale, and sing those at the relative pitch with the metronome on hand, not metronome, tuner on hand, so they can get the pitch as well as the fingerings as they go through.
Yeah, kind of what this is doing is making a physical mental connection. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's many times if you have a type of memory of you remember to do something when you're in a particular space or when you have a steering wheel in your hand or something, it's making that connection, and that may assist a number of students.
That's awesome. Right. When did you start teaching others how to play tuba and euphonium, low brass?
High school. Literally my senior year in high school, I had some students, younger students from the surrounding area who would come to me, mainly because there was nobody else. And I was like, oh, that's that All-State guy. So they would come take lessons with me. So
the All-State guy. Wow. Okay. and you're not Jake from State Farm either.
Right. Right.
So right. So how many years did you make All-State in high school?
It's really funny. So my freshman year, I went to area on trombone, and then it was my junior year. Sophomore year, I was just really kind of getting my act together. My junior year, I was absolute last chair in All-State. I was in the brass band or something. But that's when I really started working really hard. Was already working. I just hadn't figured it out. My senior year, I was first chair in All-State. But now it's North Carolina. I can't guarantee I would have done that in the state of Texas.
I understand that. So we've spoken about so many different opportunities, especially the taxi cab story that you mentioned earlier. If you've missed out on that, go back to probably around the maybe the 15-minute mark of our interview and revisit that story if you'd like. But what other opportunities, or what opportunities do you see euphonium artists, students to professional artists, having now or in the future that they could take advantage of or start preparing for?
Well, one of the things I would say is be the organizer, okay? For a number of years, I had this really great brass quintet, and people say, how did you get all these great players? And I said, I called them, okay? A lot of times, if you're the one that's willing to be the leader, people will, if you make it easy for other people, they will be there. I'm kind of, here in Corpus Christi, I'm kind of the person that books so much of stuff. I manage our Nutcracker Orchestra, and I've, worked with the Symphony a lot, and, booked the Symphony Brass Quintet. I do all that stuff. And I've always been that person who organizes brass quintets. I did that way back in Chicago.
That's incredible. Did you ever play any gigs with Arnold Jacobs?
No.
Just curious. I had to ask that. Or John Sizemore.
Oh yeah, a number of times. So yeah,
that's
that
really
was
awesome.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that really leads me into this next and final question on the Euphonium Summit through Farm for Dreams. Is any final thoughts, sayings, principles that have made a tremendous impact on you in your playing or your daily life that transcended just playing tuba, euphonium, low brass?
Well, the whole thing about this is just such a positive thing that we do. To me, both music business and performing. When I worked with the Tuba Exchange as their, I was their artist in residence, and I also would represent them at all the conferences. And so when an instrument would be sold, the student would be smiling, the parents would be smiling, and you have done something that's improved their lives. Mm-hmm. I remember one time I was playing at this concert. It was at a church, and our group was playing. This was the evening thing. It wasn't really a service. It was an evening concert, but I would always play the prelude. Me on tuba, and then my friend who was the organist, he would play and we'd do a solo. And I remember one day it was not a good day. It was a rough day. And I'm playing, and I see this lady out in the congregation, and she has tears coming down her face. And I thought, oh my gosh, how did I manage to touch this, lady, this response? And I talked to her afterwards, and her husband had been an amateur cellist, and I just happened to play one of their favorite pieces.
Oh, wow.
So we just have such an impact that sometimes we will never see. Had it been dark in there, I would not have seen that happen, and that would have been the end of it, but I still would have touched that person. So there's so many times in music we really do something for somebody, and I feel very, very fortunate that we have that opportunity.
Absolutely, especially playing even the formative years of starting out as a beginner artist, being able to play the local church, play those hymnals, hymns and stuff like that with a hodgepodge of other beginner artists, and make something beautiful. And that impact that you can bring is truly inspiring to not just the organist or the pianist that is has been assigned to that church or that organization or that body, but the congregation, the community that's there listening. It really matters. It really does. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Dr. Sipes, for being a part and contributing to this endeavor. And we hope to see you soon. And we look forward to working with you very soon. And where could they get more information if they want to learn those 6 steps of aerobics, especially?
Well, the easiest way is just reach out to me at Texas A&M University Corpus Christi. My address there, and of course I can give you this for a link also. It's dan.sipes@tamus.edu. I also do have a YouTube channel, which I haven't maintained that well in a while. I have a bunch of etudes, It's called Tuba Bay, Bay, because our university is right beside the Corpus Christi Bay. So, I have some videos on there, but yes, I'd be happy to send information to people. I'm also, I do work, as you mentioned, I do work with Mine and Wesson. I can go out and do clinics and stuff through them also. So I'd be happy to visit different parts of the country. I have done that from time to time recently.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us today, and stay tuned for the next one.
Bye.